The fuck going on with y'all, man, and welcome to the best Druid build for Diablo 4 Tornado. This is my current level 80 Druid clearing tier 30 plus nightmare dungeons pretty easily. Now, there are two versions of the Tornado Druid. The first one is the one you see on the screen. The damage is okay, the defense is okay, and doesn't really have any mobility. To be honest, the build is pretty meh. But, as you can see, it does just fine. The second version of this build requires a certain unique helmet, Tempest Roar. Once you obtain this helm, this build goes from meh to arguably one of the best builds in the game. So for this video, I'll be showing you both builds and how to make them from the ground up. We'll be going over the skills, the Druid mechanic Spirit Boons, gear and stats to look for, the Codex of Power and what legendary aspects to imprint, the Paragon board and what glyphs to socket, the best nightmare dungeons to run and what affixes to avoid, a small progression checklist to build your character, and a few tips and tricks to help with your overall Diablo 4 experience. With that being said, let's get started with the skills. Like I said, there will be two builds that I'll be going over. The first one is the one you see here. This assumes that you have just reached level 50, unlocked World Tier 3, and don't have any sacred gear yet. It's very easy to use and should do just fine in early nightmare dungeons. Let's talk about the main skills that we use for this build. Tornado is our main damage skill. The idea of this build is to spam Tornado as much as possible. If you have the spirit, then use this ability. More tornadoes equal more damage. Storm Strike is mainly used to generate spirit. It can also immobilize enemies, apply vulnerable, and provide a bit of damage reduction. Wolves and Ravens are used to give us a bit more damage. Wolves can also grant Fortify and be small meat shields, while Ravens can grant a little bit of extra critical strike chance. Earthen Bulwark gives us a huge barrier and makes you unstoppable for a short amount of time. I found myself using this ability to either break out of CC or when engaging a threatening pack of mobs. Cyclone Armor gives good damage reduction for you and your pets, and when you're in a tight spot, you can use it to knock back all close enemies and slow them heavily. And finally, our key passive, Perfect Storm. This gives us spirit generation and a sizable amount of damage. Moving on to build 2. As you can see, there are plenty of differences. The first one is Blood Howl, one of two ways that turns us into a werewolf. The most important thing about this ability is the huge 15% attack speed, allowing us to cast even more tornadoes. The next difference is Hurricane, which is mostly used for its utility. It slows enemies, gives damage reduction, and even some critical strike chance when combined with a certain legendary aspect that we'll talk about later. And finally, our ultimate, Grizzly Rage. This skill gives us damage reduction, fortify, and even makes us unstoppable. But that's not even the best part. The craziest thing about this ability is that we can manipulate it to be much stronger than it already is through a couple aspects, and of course the unique helm, Tempest Roar. Don't worry, I'll go over all of this later in the guide. Each class has their own unique class mechanic in Diablo 4. For Druids, it's Spirit Boons. For build number 1, and for build number 2, these are the boons that I'd recommend using for each build. Wariness gives us damage reduction. Swooping Attacks gives us attack speed. Pack Leader gives us a lucky hit proc for our minions. Overload helps us with AoE damage. Scythe Talons gives us critical strike chance. Calamity extends the duration of our ult. Calm Before the Storm reduces the cooldown of our ult. And finally, Masochistic gives us a bit of healing. Here is a list of each piece of gear, 3 stats that I recommend focusing on, and of course the gems to socket. Let's go over some important stats and why we need them in the first place. Cooldown reduction is extremely important for this build. We want our abilities to have as much uptime as possible because they help Tornado do its thing. Another important stat is lucky hit chance. And there is only one reason why we want to increase our lucky hit chance in the first place. The Tempest Roar unique helm. The more lucky hits you land equals the more spirit you generate. The more spirit you generate, the more tornadoes you cast. See where this is going? And finally, the third stat that I'd say is the most important in this build is damage reduction. As you do higher tier content, the mobs and affixes that you thought weren't that threatening become extremely dangerous. And the best way to defend against these unknown circumstances is damage reduction. Okay, now let's go over the Codex of Power and the aspects we use for each build. The rapid aspect gives us a lot of attack speed for Storm Strike, which means we gain more spirit. Mending Stone increases the duration of Earthen Bulwark, our best defensive skill. The aspect of Might grants us a whopping 20% damage reduction whenever we use Storm Strike. Storm Chaser's aspect is probably the best quality of life aspect for both builds. Without this aspect, your tornadoes kind of just randomly move around. Cyclonic Force provides a nice physical damage boost to you and your pets. Ghost Walkers gives us movement speed and phasing. Shepherds gives us a good amount of damage thanks to our companions. The Umbral is a good spirit generator, and it becomes great if you can find a higher rolled one. And Accelerating is another boost to our attack speed. For build number 2, here are the different aspects that we use. Retaliation gives us increased damage based on our Fortify. Rampaging Werebeast increases the duration of Grizzly Rage and gives us a small amount of critical strike damage. Disobedience replaces Cyclonic Force because the armor scaling will eventually surpass it. Direwolves is the second build enabler for this build, along with Tempest Roar. It changes Grizzly Rage so that it turns us into a werewolf instead of a werebear, while giving us movement speed, healing, and most importantly, 30 to 50% spirit cost reduction. That is huge. This, combined with Tempest Roar, a few stats, and some Paragon points, will literally mean you can spam Tornado. And finally, Night Howler's aspect gives us a nice boost to our critical strike chance. Speaking of Tempest Roar, let's talk about the uniques for this build. Tempest Roar is what makes this build one of the best builds in the game. Every single class in Diablo 4 struggles with generating their resource in order to spam their main damage ability. With this helm, combined with all the other stuff that we've talked about in this video so far, means we don't have to worry about that. Also, we're a terrifying werewolf that's super fast and super tanky. Like seriously, once you obtain this helmet, everything becomes easy mode, which is why I think this build may be nerfed in the future, but for now, take full advantage of it. Mad Wolf's Glee is not best in slot, but this is a great placeholder until you find a chest stacked with damage reduction. And Temerity is one of the easiest ways to grant you a barrier in this game. Again, not best in slot, but a nice alternative. Alright, now we move on to the final way that we make this build stronger than it already is. The Paragon system. Remember, there are 2 builds that we're going over, so I'll be showing each and every single Paragon board used, including the glyphs and nodes to take. Here we go. For build number 1, Paragon board 1, we used the glyph Exploit, giving us vulnerable damage and an easy way to apply vulnerable. The rare nodes Prime and Impel give us damage, life, and willpower. For board number 2, we attach the Ancestral Guidance board. This legendary node gives us a good amount of damage. The glyph that we socket is Human, giving us more damage and damage reduction. The rare nodes that we take here are Reclamation, Spiritual Power, and Harmony, giving us spirit generation, damage, and willpower. For board number 3, we attach the Thunderstruck board. This legendary node gives us increased critical strike damage. The glyph that we socket here is Spirit, giving us ramping damage and even more critical strike damage. The rare nodes that we take here are Hubris, Stormcaller, Deluge, and Tempest, giving us damage reduction, and more willpower. For board number 4, we attach the Constricting Tendrils board and use the glyph Earth and Sky. This gives us a bonus to all magic nodes within range, so of course we pick some up along the way. The rare nodes that we take here are Nature's Will, Courage, Devastation, and Superiority. These gives us damage, life, and willpower. For our 5th and final board for build number 1, we attach the Lust for Carnage board and socket in the glyph Undaunted. This gives us damage and damage reduction while fortified. The rare nodes we take here are Wild's Call and Regenerative, giving us attack speed, spirit, and more willpower. For build number 2, Paragon board 1, we path the same way but instead socket in the glyph Werewolf, giving us damage and damage reduction. We also add another rare node, Resolve, which gives us some resistance and willpower. For board 2, we attach the Ancestral Guidance board again, but this time socket Spirit here, picking up the same rare nodes along the way. For board 3, we attach the Lust for Carnage board and socket in Undaunted. We also pick up a new rare node here called Feral, which gives us some damage and willpower. For board 4, we attach the Thunderstruck board and socket in Earth and Sky. All rare nodes are the same. For board 5, we attach the Constricting Tendrils board and socket in Exploit. Unlike the previous build, we only take 2 rare nodes here, Courage and Nature's Will. For the 6th and final board, we attach the Heightened Malice board. This legendary node gives us a large amount of damage when poison enemies are nearby, which is basically all the time. And the rare node, Poison Resilience, gives us poison resistance and a little bit of life. For glyphs, this is the order that I'd recommend leveling your glyphs, from most important to least. First, you are going to level them to 15 because it increases their range. Then, move on to level 21, increasing their range even more, making them a lot stronger than they were. At this point, you're probably going to have some extra Paragon points, so feel free to use them wherever you want. Here are the 10 best Nightmare dungeons that I would recommend running as a Tornado Druid. These dungeons felt the easiest, fastest, and most rewarding when leveling my character. I would also avoid the burn primary resource affix at all costs. The idea of this build is to be able to cast tornadoes, and this affix prevents that. Also, other affixes like Empowered Elite's Suppressor, Lightning Storm, and Stormbane's Wrath are doable, but are also very annoying to deal with, so do with that what you will. Here is a small, easy to follow progression checklist that you can use while leveling your character. The absolute first thing that you should do before anything else is to obtain all the aspects that you are going to use in these builds, at least the ones that you can get through dungeons. The reason why we do this first is because we want to have these aspects ready to imprint on our new and improved gear. The next thing you should do is farm Renown 5 in all regions, which is definitely a lot easier to say than do, but you gotta do it eventually. Those extra skill points and Paragon points go a long way in building your character, and they also apply to any other characters you have in that realm. Here is how I was able to do it. First, I got all the waypoints, making it easy to travel. Then, I did all the strongholds because they were good sources of XP and unlocked other important things like more waypoints and dungeons. Then, I got all the altars of Lilith, probably the most daunting task of all. But with the help of the interactive map, it made it a lot easier than I thought, which we'll talk about later. After the altars, I completed all the dungeons. After the dungeons, I did the amount of side quests necessary to reach max renown in all regions. And there you go. I know it sounds like a lot, and it is, but trust me, it's 100% worth it. And then, once you've completed all of this, first of all, congrats on your hard work. The next thing you should do, if you haven't already, is obtain a full set of Sacred Gear. And for Sacred Gear, I would suggest only upgrading a high DPS weapon with good stats no more than 4 times. The reason why we don't want to do too much with Sacred Gear is because it'll get replaced by Ancestral Gear pretty quickly, so make sure you save your resources until then. Once you've obtained a full set of Sacred Gear, then proceed to level up to 70 via Nightmare Dungeons, Hell Tides, Tree of Whispers, whatever you want. Once it's 70, do the Capstone Dungeon in order to unlock World Tier 4, and your first order of business at World Tier 4 is to get a full set of Ancestral Gear. If you are lucky enough to find a good piece with 2 out of the 3 stats that we mentioned earlier, then go ahead and enchant a third good stat on it, upgrade it fully, add sockets if need be, and then imprint your highest rolled aspect as well. And there you go. You pretty much have a best in slot. While you're doing this, fill out your Paragon board and upgrade your glyphs, and now your character is reaching God tier levels. At this point, you can do whatever you want. Level to 100, climb Nightmare Dungeon tiers, fight Lilith. The open world is yours. Like I mentioned earlier, I used the Diablo 4 interactive map in order to farm Renown 5 in all the regions. This map literally shows where everything is in the open world. Waypoints, dungeons, altars, everything. If you would like to save hours and hours of gameplay and car insurance, then I'd highly recommend using this website. I'll go ahead and link it down below in the description. Another great website to use while you're roaming around Sanctuary is the Helltide and Mystery Chest Tracker. Helltides are probably the easiest way to gear up your character and farm Forgotten Souls, which is probably the most important material in the game. Scattered throughout these areas are random chests full of gear, some with weapons, some with armor, and some with jewelry. In fact, I'd say Helltides are the best way to try to obtain the unique helmet Tempest Roar. However, there are other secret chests you can find that give the most loot. These are called mystery chests. Unfortunately, they are not displayed as vividly as the other chests on your map, so they're pretty hard to locate. Luckily, there is a website that not only tracks Helltides, but also tracks the mystery chests in a Helltide, and there are 2 mystery chests per Helltide. Now, you don't have to do every single Helltide that pops up in your map, but you do want to do them occasionally to make sure you have a nice stack of Forgotten Souls. Again, I'll go ahead and link it down below in the description. As you're getting more and more gear, filtering out bad and good pieces, make sure to keep well-rolled aspects and uniques you might want to use later. However, for the most part, the gear that you will find will probably be just bad. What you are going to do with this bad gear is to sell it to the vendor and not salvage it. It's pretty easy to come across material in this game, but gold is best obtained through selling stuff. And when you're trying to make your gear as godly as possible, it becomes extremely expensive. Now, there is nothing wrong with salvaging here and there, but for the majority of the time, sell, sell, sell. And while you're traveling around the open world, make sure you are picking up any and all materials that you come across. Some of these materials are herbs, and herbs are used to craft elixirs. After level 50, you basically want to have an elixir active at all times. 1, because they give a pretty nice buff, and 2, more importantly, for that extra 5% XP boost, which I know doesn't sound like a lot, but over time can amount to a large amount of XP. Like most builds in Diablo 4, you can't just run around, press one button, and have a good time. No, it's actually going to take some kind of strategy. At least not until you obtain the Tempest Roar Helm. The most basic method that I'd recommend instead of killing one monster at a time is gather them up first, and then use all your abilities. This way, you get the most out of your cooldowns and you expend the least amount of resource. Speaking of killing mobs, let's go more in depth to show you the general combo that I would use when I was leveling my character. Well, to be honest, there isn't really much of a combo to this build. What you want to do, and what you will do eventually, is just spam Tornado as much as you can. Fill up the screen with so many tornadoes that it makes it impossible for your enemies to escape and for your eyes to actually see what's going on. And there we have it, y'all. The best endgame druid build for Diablo 4. And remember, this is just a build template. If you disagree with anything in this video, then feel free to just do whatever you want. Take what you like and don't take what you don't like. I just wanted to provide a simple, easy to follow build guide that would help those who are struggling with progressing their character. And hopefully I've done that. And hey, if you did find any parts of this video useful, then I'm super glad. I have now completed an endgame build guide for all the classes except for Barbarian, which is the video I'll be doing next, along with a lot more Diablo 4 video ideas. So if you're interested in anything Diablo 4, throw me a sub, yeah? Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. And remember to stay a while and listen. Peace out.